Hello, this is Adrian from my channel Random Drop, and I'm doing a little bit something different today. In the past, I always kind of did my takes on the gaming industry and things I liked in the industry. Typically when something comes up about 14 or WoW, it's usually things I'm very specialized in because I just have a lot of experience in MMOs. But this time I did want to talk about Final Fantasy 16. A bunch of info came out on the game today. I'm very excited for that game. I think the combat and stuff looks awesome and fun, but been reading a lot of interviews, a lot of takes on Twitter, like a lot of really dumb takes, and I kind of wanted to go over some of the points that people are saying or bringing up or their concerns. So hey, let's start off with the beginning here. Final Fantasy 16 is produced by Yoshida, a man who has gained godhood status among people. There's like the cult of Yoshida, right? Like people fucking really believe in this guy, and he's earned it, right? Sometimes he has a dumb take every now and then, or like, but he is a very open dude in terms of like they actually let him talk and shit, and like he gives takes, and like sometimes he's on point, sometimes he's like, you could probably take that back, or like rethink it, or think about how you said it. But hey, once a Twitter mob grabs it, once it goes through translation too, it's all up in the air, and he all he can do is probably just shake his head and just move on, because he's not going to convince anyone, and he gets that. But the dude is, hey, highly revered. There are many people who are in the Final Fantasy community like don't like him just because he's so popular, and they like kind of want to tear him down in a weird way. It's really fucking weird. There's a lot of takes right now like how he like doesn't understand the series or anything like that. And it's all just like really dumb bullshit. It would be, there are probably very low amount of people who have played 14, finished 14, and would come out of that game and say, nah, that guy don't get it. Like, there's, please leave me a comment below if you're that fucking person. Tell me why, because holy shit, man, the guy gets it. He, as many people don't want to admit, right, that are on the negative side, the dude saved the series like straight out, and he had a plan and a mission, and he fucking did it, man. And his team did it, and kudos to his team for sticking with him and believing in this crazy asshole to do it all. But hey, the Square Enix decided to give him a mainline Final Fantasy because he literally saved their asses, and I imagine there's probably a bunch of CEOs sitting around being like, why don't we give it to that guy? He seems to know what the fuck we're doing after we've fucked up like 5 Final Fantasies. Maybe we should give it to him. So that's what happened. He eventually got, appointed lead producer, right? So he's a producer, right? He's just making sure the team has what they need, helps with general ideas and stuff, but he's not like the director, right? But he is there to make sure the ball is fucking rolling and getting done on time. And it seems like, as he said, it would literally take a meteor crashing into Square Enix offices for this game to get delayed. He is so fucking adamant. It's awesome. It has been decades, I think, at this point, where we haven't had a Final Fantasy that has had development issues. This game was announced and it's coming out, dude. Like, what the fuck? It didn't get delayed 5 times or reworked, or a billion trailers that like like very much sold a different game that didn't exist. Like, holy crap. So Final Fantasy 16, it's coming. But there's a lot of people who they're skeptical, right? They see the action combat and they're just like very scared. He's saying the words are getting thrown out like GTA, God of War, action oriented. And there's just these fucking people coming out being like, he doesn't understand Final Fantasy or what people want. And it's like a very gatekeepy mentality of like, even people saying like, those Call of Duty people would never love this game or like this game. Stop trying to appeal to a wider audience. Motherfucker, I like Call of Duty. I like lots of video games. I don't tie myself to one, right? There are many people who do play just the GTAs and Call of Duties that probably did play Final Fantasy at some point. But then 10 came out, was a fucking like massive success for lots of people, defined lots of people's childhood, and that was it. 13 came out and only like JRPG people liked it, and there was like a wet fart. Then 2 more of those games came out and people fucking hated them. And even though they were like actually better games overall, the story was so damn bad. And then 14 came out and was a fucking clusterfuck because of how incredible 11 was. And then the 14 did not translate in that way until it was saved by Yoshida. Then we get 15, which was in development hell for so long and went through so many revisions and was basically slapped and stitched together to be finished. It went through a lot of struggle, and if it had come out in a better state, people would feel a lot better about the franchise. But that's not how things turned out, right? There has not been a Final Fantasy that has like shook the people in so long, and 14 is that game. 14 is that good, but the MMO side not drags it down, but like it's literally a wall for people, and he gets that. So like, okay, well, let's do what we did with 14 and try to make a fucking Final Fantasy that's more accessible, right? And that's what they're doing now, action focused, and it's learning from titles like you see here in this article, God of War and stuff like that. And people don't like that. There's lots of people who once you start comparing it to Western titles and things like that and saying that they're looking for Western side, they instantly get defensive and saying like, nah man, you shouldn't be trying to learn from them or anything like that, which is fucking stupid, because this is what caused the initial issue with 14. The fact that they didn't look at their competitors and try to make like a better game for a wider audience. Like, there are people who liked original 14 1.0. Not enough to say it's staying a business or an MMO though, right? If Final Fantasy wants to be as big and as bombastic as it can, it does have to be to a wider audience. Turn-based is not for the wider audience. People don't like turn-based as much. It is very simple. it's straight up a fact. There's a lot of people who do love turn-based. I am one of them. But honestly, I played Persona 4 or Persona 5 Scramble. Yo, that combat's pretty good. I would probably actually do that in the actual Persona 5 game rather than doing the turn-based that like gets so easy at a point. And once you've played so many of those games, you just, Persona games are real easy once you beat a couple of them. It's just it. Final Fantasy 7, I believe, is a great mix of the two and is a good middle ground, but that game is still gonna push people away. There's too many fucking menus. It's not as simple as controlling a dude and doing wombo combos, right? Like, it's just not, right? Not many people want to, just like not many people want to play, D&D or CRPGs and control a bunch of characters in a row. Not many people want to do that with a Final Fantasy game, right? So there's this like weird tone in trying to tear Yoshida down, like he doesn't understand the series itself, for him trying to embrace these ideas. And he personally thinks that, like, hey, Final Fantasy isn't one idea. It is something that can grow and is whatever the director at the time decides and what the team decides at that time that they want to make. And I think that's cool. It's like the first true anthology series like JoJo's, right, for games. Where like, hey, every part's gonna be a bit different. And that's totally fine. This weird gatekeeping bullshit is so dumb, man. And again, it is what caused the initial issues to begin with like the original 14, right? Stuck in their own ways. And you can even say with like a lot of how 13 is created and set up, like kind of stuck in their own ways. And that brings me to so yeah, there's this God of War title. This is the God of War comparison, right? And lots of people, there's lots of like weird Twitter snippets and things like that trying to take things out of context. When they were talking about God of War, they were talking about how the game is structured. Meaning, in God of War, there's a overarching story with a bunch of side quests. A lot of them, actually a lot of battle content. That's pretty good. But it's all, instead of it being an open world game, it's, imagine a large box. This box in the center is, I guess I can whip out the paint here. All right, so here's paint. So how God of War is structured, if any of you've never played the game, is there's a big center hub. It's like a big main center area like this, where there's a bunch of like side quests and shit all over, side quests all over this area, maps, places to explore and all stuff. But this is where this center square is where you'll go back to after every major story point of the game. You always come back to this part of the game, right? It's like, imagine the hunter's place in Bloodborne, right? It's like, hey, this is my central place where I'm connected to everything. So how they're describing how the structure of the game is not open world, but it's actually just a center hub with a bunch of different squares it's connected to, that you will go out for story missions and hunts and side quests and main quests that all connect back to this center hub in some way. And maybe there'll be like zones in between like this, right? Between the two or something like that. But that's how God of War is structured. It is a big center hub, and then it offshoots and branches to other big areas, big zones, right? Not necessarily like absolute true open world, but probably like, really, like Final Fantasy 14 zones. They're just big expansive areas, but they're enclosed and there are zone lines. But that allows them to do more bombastic shit with each area. And each area can be absolutely different than the other. And what's inside that box can be absolutely different than the other, because they're not tied to like a theme of area, right? Like, hey, this is a Grand Plains area, but the area to the northwest is like a icy mountain type of area or something like that. In an open world, you would have to build the world to where it got to that point, and the area could only be so big. It would be a 20th of the map compared to like everything else, right? Like, there are biomes in open world areas, but they could be so much diverse whenever you are doing a box and hub system like this, like in God of War. The areas are so different to every single one you go to. So that's kind of how they're describing the structure of the game is, which makes a whole lot of fucking sense, and is a really smart way to approach it. But that is one thing I wanted to clear up about the God of War comparisons and the varying comparisons the developers are making as well. Is that, hey, the game is very much world structure wise like this. You're always going back to the center every now and then to recoup, regear, get new quests, explore new areas that you weren't able to explore before, and then go off to another branch. But yeah, that's how this game is going to be structured. I think it's a really smart idea, because as someone who's actually delved and played other games, I know how good God of War's side content can be. I don't necessarily love the God of War story, because I feel like there's just not too much, like, there's a lot of good dialogue and stuff, but there's not that overarching party feel and multiple characters, because you're pretty much, it's you and your son, and you only interact with so many characters. I do want to see a lot more characters in the 16, right? I don't want it to be so isolated like the God of War game is. And yeah, the game itself is going to be a darker tone, which he's described in interviews. He said, like, hey, people were asking, like, hey, is there going to be anything like Blitzball or anything like that in the game? And they simply said, no, like, there is not. Our game is can be a very much darker tone, and to go off and go fishing or play Blitzball is just like not really something we want to like sacrifice like the structure of our story for, or like the feel of our story. And people really took that in like a weirdly dumb negative way of like, oh, they took it as, oh, he's making fun of Final Fantasy 15, how dare he, or like he's making fun of the past series, like he didn't enjoy that shit. Like, dude, he's played them all, and he did like that stuff. That's why it's in a lot of that shit's in 14. There's fucking dumbass chocobo racing and shit in that game. Like, he understands people love those mini games and stuff, but he just does not personally feel like it is a fit for their game. Took it without any context and just ran with, oh, the dude is making fun of 15, and he thinks having any levity in a dark time is dumb, which is not at all what he's saying. He very much clearly says in the interview. So he describes how the game is gonna be very violent, like, or the demo they've showed is very violent because it's very combat focused, and it's gonna be very dark and it's gonna be very action oriented and not really touch upon the more lighter aspects of the game. There are lighter aspects and more emotional aspects of the game. You have themes such as brotherly love and the love of a nation, love of others, these friendships, these bonds, and things you've come to expect from a Final Fantasy series. Those types of themes will also be covered in Final Fantasy 16 as well. And there are portions that are going to get deeply emotional. And there are also lighter parts. Because when you talk about a story that's dark, it's always about finding hope in that darkness. And there's a lot of hope in this game as well. That is it. That is the whole argument. And it's like the snippet about like the blitzball thing is going around, but completely like ignoring this part of the interview where he says like, yes, we understand like people don't want it to be all dark and gritty all the time. We do have some lighter stuff, but it is all going to be in side stories, side quests, and dialogue. We don't really have a mini game. Any side stuff we do have is I believe Takai goes down at the bottom later in the interview. It focuses on our action and battle system. So instead of having like, you know, a mini game that honestly, guys, the mini games of the Final Fantasy games aren't very good. The only good one is the fishing one in 15. I did not like Blitzball, but sure, whatever. If you like Blitzball, it's fucking fine. If you like Tetramaster and all that, that's fine. But Tetramaster ain't no Gwent, right? It's not as good as that. But even then, Geralt running around collecting cards was fucking dumb as well. And it made no sense while his daughter is getting chased by the Wild Hunt. It's really stupid, but that's an open world thing. This is not an open world game. This is a bit more focused of a game. But yeah, I mean, not that I like, hey, if like that stuff was in the game, I would like hate it. I'd be fine with it. But it is, you know, hey, if a director thinks or someone thinks like, it doesn't really fit this, that it's fine. And that the fact that they don't waste time on it and put it more into the battle system is even better. There's not like dumb side activities in God of War, but they add a lot of bitchin' boss fights that you can do on the side and like collectibles and things like that to explore and like challenges and things like that. That like God of War has a lot of good side stuff and is really fun and feels good to complete as you play through that game. So I hope 16 can do better than that, especially with having such a better combat system. Holy shit, in that game. It's not that there's no levity in the game. There is, and it is going to be overall a darker tone. But as someone who's played Endwalker, I know what they can do. I've played the Garlemald zone. I know they can bring levity in a very, very bleak situation. Garlemald is a very fucked up zone to be in that game. But they do bring out that hope in it, and that's what the best part of that game is that there's so much darkness, but there's like this beacon of the good still, and you're able to like bring it out and show it to the people who are stuck in that darkness. Garlemald is one of the best MMO zones ever made, and probably one of the best like RPG zones ever made. There's a lot of people like trying to take that in a negative fashion, like he doesn't understand the series or some shit like that. But it's really dumb and it has no basis. And yeah, a lot of those like quotes and stuff are like just taken super out of context. They just describe that their game. They feel like it's not necessary. It's not him shitting on other games or the past games. He's saying that their game, it just feels like it doesn't match. So he's going more of a medieval dark fantasy berserk world type of thing. Yo, I'm here. I'm down for it. Take me on that adventure. Yeah, it's gonna be a good ride. These people are fucking crazy. That's all there is to it. Last point is the JRPG thing. Some people were like caught a little bit by surprise by this, but I think it's just because of the very nature of like Japanese culture. They kind of just don't talk about this shit. They don't speak up when they feel like, even if they're like being wrong, right? They kind of just like don't want confrontation. And Yoshi P said, nah, fuck it. I'm coming out guns blazing. It's time someone said this. I think it was Skill Up was trying to ask questions about like, he asked a question about like, hey, do you think that the other JRPGs have not advanced themselves enough or something like that? And then he's like, why are you talking about JRPG? I'm talking about RPGs in general. Like, basically Yoshi P said, JRPG is very much a Western thing. When what we're making is an RPG. That's what we've always been trying to make. But Western media has taken, in the past, not nowadays, it's a lot better nowadays, but in the past, JRPG was a negative connotation. And it's true. If you're around the Xbox era, PS3 era, Japanese games struggled for a bit. The PS3 was not doing so hot. It was really tough to develop for. A lot of the developers went to the DS and stuff like that to, cut development costs and stuff like that. And the mobile market was like fucking exploding. There was a large like part of those years of like, from the Western side, if it came from Japan, it meant it was bad. It meant it was cheaper, wasn't as grand, or it it didn't conform to Western development style, so they like immediately, it was too like there's like quotes out there saying like, oh, it's too Japanese, or it's like nowadays when people say, oh, this game's too anime, and it's like really fucking cringe, because what does that even mean? Animation? What? So it's very much the thing, like Yoshi P's like kind of defending themselves, but like, hey, out here we've always been trying to make RPGs. Just like animation and anime, it's just Japanese animation. But like the Western side has taken that to use it in a negative way for many years. Again, it has gone better over recently. But yeah, in the past, like games like Vanquish would get negatively reviewed for being too Japanese, right? And the only like Japanese games were like platinum, right? And even they got labeled in that way. Dante wasn't cool anymore because he was like too much of an anime character. So like eventually like it got to this point, if you weren't like a dude bro shooter or like a super self-serious game, you're probably from Japan. And yeah, there's like this weird negative connotation, and that it's really interesting that you brought it up, because it's actually true. And it's like this weird thing that like a lot of Westerners, we probably didn't like realize what was happening, because of course on their end like they're just saying that they're making RPGs, but the fact that they're like talking about it now, it's because like most Japanese people are very reserved, and Yoshi P has a lot of power, and he's like, fuck it, I'm gonna say this thing because you know what, I hate being called a JRPG. And that's true, we don't label all the RPGs fucking different RPGs, only them like a CRPG, but we barely do that anymore. It's just Western RPGs. You were not labeled a JRPG if you're a successful game, right? So like like Dark Souls, Demon Souls, those are JRPGs technically, but they're not called JRPGs because they were like critically acclaimed and loved by Western people, right? So it was only the successful games that like remove that connotation, right? The same thing with like Zelda. Like no one's going around calling Zelda like too anime-y, when even though there's very much anime like facial features and characteristics about that series, no one's around going saying that shit. But there's a lot of games that came out around that time that yeah, like that they just got labeled, and like many people wouldn't give RPGs a shot that came from Japan. They wouldn't give action games a shot that came from Japan because of those labels. And I remember back in the day thinking it was so weird because I loved those games. Those were more of the games I gravitated to. But yeah, you had friends, or even like you would watch journalists, and I guess influencers back in the day, but it was mostly journalists, like bash on games because they were from Japan or some shit like that. Or like the Japanese games aren't good. The joke's on you, motherfuckers. The best game in the world right now is a fucking Japanese game made. It's called Elden Ring, and holy shit. And it just does not give a shit and does not conform to any Western type of thinking, and it's incredible. And it showed the whole industry up by just being a very solid made thing with some very good ideas. But yeah, that's a little rant on the JRPG thing. If you like didn't understand where he was coming from, and maybe you just didn't grow up around the like Xbox 360 era and all that, or didn't understand what was going on at the time, but that's where he's coming from on that part. Again, games are a lot more diverse, and you're able to find your audiences much better and talk to them. Like the Yakuza series as well got labeled as like bad Japanese game, right? It's Japanese Grand Theft Auto, but it's like so much more and better in its own right. Like Yakuza 1 and 2 stories are like really fucking good, and to be labeled in that way, then going back and thinking about it, it's like, man, that fucking sucked. Holy shit. But that's beside the point. But yeah, I think I covered everything at this point. Yeah, that's the main point, is like, hey, Yoshi P talked about the JRPG thing, and many people were taking a lot of his like feelings out of context in regards to what they're trying to do with his game. But all right, that's it for me. I think I've covered all the subjects. The large misinterpretation of like what Yoshi P is even saying in those interviews, plus the JRPG thing and how like that kind of shocked a lot of people. And some people got defensive about it. It's like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. Like, no, I mean that I love JRPGs. It's like, no, I understand you meant it that way. It's just that there was a large 2006 to 2012 that like that shit. Like people dunked on Japanese games just for them being Japanese, and it was real weird for a while. But like I said, games are much wider now. Everyone loves Yakuza and thinks it's fucking awesome. Not everyone, but a lot more people than did back then. And they're willing to give it more of a shot. Anime is more popular than ever, so it's all good stuff there. And then yeah, I talked about like the God of War stuff and the comparisons and what the developers said in the interview, right? What they mean by like the structure, and of course journalists taking that or seeing how when they played the game how it's structured as well, being like, hey, this is kind of like God of War. It's like, yeah, it's kind of like God of War actually, which is not a bad thing. Now I hope they take a lot of lessons from that game. Hey, leave a comment below if you disagree or like the video. There's other stuff we do, but maybe I'll do some more news videos like this in the future. But this is a topic I'm very, very passionate about. I understand that Yoshi P is still a man who can make mistakes, but in here he's in the right. Other stuff he's talked about, probably not. But in here, he's not wrong in terms of like what this game needs to be or what he wants it to be. But yeah, leave a comment below, like, comment, subscribe. We have the One Piece podcast that we did where like I watched the entire series of One Piece and kind of reflect on it with my friend Bryce and talk over it in podcast format. It was an incredible journey, and 90% of it is done. We just need like one more podcast episode to do Whole Cake, and then we'll do one more when we've actually finished Wano Arc. And then we have the Two Friends Play series where me and him have tried different games. Last thing we did was like Harry Potter and some highlights of that, but did Dead Space, and we plan to do more stuff like that in the future. We do streams on Twitch, and we stream on YouTube as well simultaneously. But hey, hit up us on Twitter, and that's all I have. Bye bye.